again. For this video, I want you to join me on how to issue Recibo verdes online under if your client is outside Portugal, and I'll try explaining for you so that you have better understanding which option best suited you. If you're moving to Portugal and want to work independently, then you need to know the green receipts, as they are essential for you to be able to carry out your self-employment and issue invoices to your client. In order to issue Recibo verdes, you have to open activity. You can watch my previous video on how to register as freelancer or open activity in Portugal. It is possible to open an activity through the finance website online, but I do not recommend this because if you're not familiar with the portal, you will likely end up marking a wrong item and get huge fines for having choose the wrong options on the opening form of the activity. And correcting the registration plus the appealing for the fines can take months to process, and you can become irregular in tax activity in Portugal. So I recommend opening an activity in person at the tax office to avoid any mistakes in filling out the form. In addition, you can take the opportunity to ask directly any doubts you have regarding green receipts, IVA, IRS, and any tax relation. Now let's get started. We first access the Finances portal. Type your NIF number and password and click Authenticate. You can go to Services and find green receipts or Recibo verdes, but for now, let's do the shortcut way. Here in the main page, we type on the Search tab Fatura. No, you actually can't find anything if you type in English on the Search tab. So remember to type in Portuguese word if you want to find specific item. Reminder, I mostly auto-translate my page in English for non-Portuguese viewers. So here let's locate Emitter and click Aceder. Again, if you are exercising any work as an independent profession here in Portugal with open activity in finances, know that you need to issue receipts for all the services you provided, even if you are exempt from collecting or charging VAT and withholding IRS at source. So in this video, I will show you how to fill in green receipts and tackle some of the VAT regime and withholding tax. So here, you can consult all the invoices you've already issued or issue new invoices. We are now going to issue. Here we have two choices, invoice or invoice received or receipt. What's the difference between them? We provide a service, let's say, as business consultant, but I believe this is also the case in the other professions. We have an obligation to issue a service invoice for that sale within 5 days of that date on which the service is provided or sale, and not necessarily the date of issue of the invoice, and will be the same as the date of receipt of payment. That's why we have these options here in Portal. If you provide the service and receive payment at the same time, you will issue an invoice receipt. But in case you have provided a service and still have not received payment for it, you will need to issue an invoice first within 5 days of the date of provision. And when you receive the payment from your customer or client, you issue a receipt. As the portal explains here below on each option, issue an invoice receipt here, and issue here a receipt associated with an invoice already issued, of which is always associated with the invoice you've already issued but not yet been paid. This second situation happens a lot with job and professional field, with regular contract or with project basis contract. For example, we will be entitled to receive fees for providing the service asked by your client, and we issue an invoice in the next maximum 5 days after the service is done or after the final decision. But the payment will only be made by your company or client at the end of the month or every cutoff of the month following the provision of services. So we will first issue an invoice, and then, when we receive the payment, we will issue the payment receipt. On the other hand, invoice receipt is if you provide a service and receive payment on the same time you issue. Sample for this is if your client asks you to tutor his or her son for 3 hours today, and after finishing the hour asked, your client pay you the same time or day before you leave, you choose invoice receipt. So now that you have better understanding on this part, we now move on issuing an invoice receipt and click this. In my case, I have provided a service and have already received payment at the same time. Let's first fill in here the date the service was provided, then type the document we are going to issue. For my case, it will be invoice receipt since I have provided a service and have already received the payment at the same time, here in the first option. Remember, if you haven't received the payment yet, then you just choose the second option. And once you receive the payment, you go back on the page before this and click Receipt. You will then locate the invoice you have already issued by typing the NIF number of the client and the date you issued the invoice, and then just click that you already received the payment. It is possible to issue green receipts without having an open activity when the income comes from the practice of an isolated act that is, an extra income, on a freelancer basis, which does not result from a foreseeable or repeated practice. Now here in the first box, my information as a service provider is already filled in. Now for the activity, if you have more than one, you can choose which type of activity you provided for the service you are reporting on the receipt. Just select from the option here. Remember to declare your other activity if you're doing more than one so it will appear in this box. For my part, I only have one. In the following table, fill in the customer's or company's data, name, address, and tax number. Now the country location of your client is very important. If your client is Portuguese or outside Portugal, you must choose and indicate here because the location of your client will also be the basis of how your tax is computed. It is possible to leave this box completely blank and not indicate who is the person receiving the service. And when you finish issuing the invoice, it will be issued anyway. But the system will send you an automatic notice that the invoice cannot be canceled afterward because you did not indicate the customer details. So this is up to you guys, and I'm only informing you the consequence if you don't put the customer's details. You can also put the passport number on the NIF or other identification document if you don't know their tax number. If you want to keep updated on my next video all regarding Portugal or request, or suggest a video regarding your concerns, please subscribe and like. Continuing here in the next box, we will mark which payment from your client you received as. It may be for the reason of payment for good or services, which is actually the remuneration you have already received for that service. And in my case, it will be the payment of their fees. Then you also have advance. If you were given a receipt for advance fee, which is a part of the amount of the fee that the client pays you before providing the service, as if it were a down payment of the fee for the service asked, or it could be an advance for payment of expenses on behalf of the client, like payment for the expenses on account of the customer, which, as the name implies, is an amount the customer sends you to pay for the expenses with that service. And it's not remuneration for you, the professional who is performing the service. It is for payment of expenses only. Precisely because of this, the system gives a warning here that, when selecting the amount received as advance payment option for the payment of expenses on behalf of the customer, the selected VAT and IRS rates will be lost. This is because if you are receiving an amount from your client, which is not for your own remuneration, or which is not for the total compensation or payment for completing their work or delivering the required services, but to pay some expense with those services, you will not have to pay taxes, which are VAT and IRS on amount the expense fee will not be for you. So for my part, the amount I received here from my client was for a day worth of work for fixing the scene. And the client wanted at the end of the day and pays me 600 euros in fees. Here I'm going to type the description that the payment is for fee on fixing of a scene on a specific project. You can name the project if you want. It all depends on you. Now, here in the base value, let's put 600 euros, which was the amount the client paid me. Here, in some cases, if you charge VAT to your client, you don't put the exact value because VAT will still apply to the base amount. And if you put 600 as base amount here like I did, and then add the VAT amount, it will appear that you received more than 600 euros. I'll break it down so you get better understanding on this. We'll now focus on the VAT regime box for this, as I indicate 600 euros as a base value, and then indicate that I will withhold VAT at the rate of 23%, which is the standard rate here in Portugal for my service. See that below in the rate received. The value will appear 738 euros, which is wrong. I didn't receive 738 euros from my client. I received a total of 600 euros. So in this case, the value that I fill here in the base value should be 462 euros. Then the amount received will be 600 euros. As you can see here, it's now exactly the amount I received from my client. So what I actually received in my pocket was 462 euros, and I will pay the Portuguese state a tax, which is VAT, in the amount of 138 euros. For now, as you can see on my VAT value, there's no deduction, it's zero, even though I choose option continent at 23%. That because for first year of registration, you will never charge VAT to a client, even you do more than 12,500 euros. Also, very important in the description to always translate it in Portuguese as specific as possible what you've done, because if you're applying for the NHR, the non-habitual residence, this description is part of the proof whether you can get NHR perks or not. So make sure to apply for NHR before March 31. Although the NHR came to an end in January 2024, The Portuguese government's state of budget proposal for 2024 included modification that determines the end on non-habitual resident regime. It's still possible for individual to apply up until March 31, 2025, but the eligibility requirement for this deadline might be stricter and more specific only for certain profession. Another to consider when your clients are outside Europe, you do not charge VAT in any circumstances. The location of transactions subject to VAT is one of the most complex matters in the field of value-added tax. Locating a transaction for tax purposes means determining the territory where that transaction is taxable. That is why it is extremely important that we have at least good understanding of the rules of location so that you're able to get exempted from, or if you need to charge VAT to your client, or if your country have double taxation treaty with Portugal in order to avoid double taxation at the time of your application. Therefore, when filling in the receipt, you must also indicate the reason for not having to pay the tax. This applies whether the company is from an EU country or not. So it's important to choose the right VAT regime option here, that you're not obliged to charge VAT in accordance with Article 6 that is related with location of your client. If it is a client inside EU but outside Portugal, you do the VAT reverse charge. And if it is an intra-community services, you need to charge VAT according with the VAT law in the client's country inside EU, and then you need to use the right article when filling in your invoice here according to your situation. To be honest, it's more daunting for me to issue Recibo than declare an IVA, especially if you're just started here in Portugal, because there's a lot to consider as foreigner of which article you need to choose for your case. Remember to consult with an accounting or tax professional for specific guidance based on your personal situation if you're still not sure. They can provide detailed advice on which option is most advantageous for you. You need to choose here the appropriate VAT regime, and in my case, Regras de Localização, Article 6, which related to the location of my client, which is outside Europe. And then in the base value, you will be able to put 600 euros, because as you will not be paying VAT for a year, so it's zero, the amount received at the end will be equal to the base value. One more thing. Don't forget that you input the payment you received on Recibo's verdes in euros currencies. It's important to convert any foreign currencies to euro. Now, when I go to issue my receipt, how do I know if I'm using the article, the exemption regime, or the normal VAT regime? I know. It can be very confusing and technical. To find out about this, you have to see how your opening statement of activity in finances. So make sure to input the right information when opening activity online, or as I advised, open an activity in person at the tax office to avoid any mistakes in filling the form. Remember to give an estimation on how much you're earning in 1 year to the staff so that they'll know you are exempt in certain area or not. If your activity was opened with exemption regime, when you issue your receipt, you will opt for the exemption regime in each of them. On contrary, you opened activity with normal VAT regime, you will always have to pay VAT in each of your operations at a rate of 6%, 13%, or 23%, depending on the type of service you provided. The vast majority of professional freelancer who came here on digital nomad visa is taxed under the rate of 23%. But remember, for the first year, you do not charge VAT. Even if you earn more than the 12,500 euros on that year, it starts only after 1 year of registration. Another thing, it is possible to be exempt, at least for workers covered by Articles 53 of the VAT Code and Article 9 of the VAT Code. If you have Category B, which if you live and work in Portugal as freelancer, and if your total annual income is less than 10,000 euros, you are exempt from VAT under Article 53 of the VAT Code. You may be exempted for other business reasons, and you should check your activity in Article 9 of the VAT Code. If you are not exempt, you must select the percentage of VAT due. The normal rate in Portugal is 23%. Or if your yearly income gets over 12,500 euros, you will be informed that you need to start charge VAT, 23% for services, to your clients after completing 1 year of activity. For my part, since I gave my annual estimation to exceed 12,500 euros, I'm not eligible for the IVA regime of Article 53. Now that you know how the VAT is calculated to the payment you received from service you provided, let's focus on reverse charge mechanism. Most freelancer or self-employed can choose this if they met the criteria. Choosing the right VAT regime is very important, as it will determine how much of VAT you will pay regarding your services or sold goods. Please ask for advice if you are not sure what VAT option you should use. It's also very important to choose the right article if you want to reduce or even exempt some type of services from tax. For digital nomad or some Portuguese local freelancers whose client is outside Portugal, you do not charge VAT. This doesn't necessarily inclusive to only countries located outside Europe, but also EU members. VAT reverse charge is the process that occurs when an individual purchases products or services and is responsible for their settlement. That is, when there is an investment of the taxable person. For VAT purposes, determine whether your client is inside or outside the EU and consult a tax professional or the Portuguese tax authorities for personalized advice if you're not sure how your activity or trade applies on reverse charge mechanism, or there are more technicalities to consider. For reverse charge to apply, the following conditions must be jointly met. 1. The supplier is not established in Portugal and does not have a fiscal representative there. 2. The client is a taxable person established in Portugal or is VAT registered there with a fiscal representative. If any of the above conditions are not met, reverse charge will not apply, and the supplier will charge the appropriate Portuguese VAT rate on their transactions. Remember, reverse charge is a deviation from the general VAT rules in which businesses usually charge VAT on supplies and deduct VAT on purchases. Through the reverse charge mechanism, the supplier does not charge VAT on the invoice to the client, and the client is responsible for manually calculating the VAT on their VAT return. This is to be simultaneously reported as input and output VAT, making the transaction have no effect on the cash flow of the client. As you can see in the VAT regime box, there's a lot of options regarding VAT reverse charge. So you must choose the right regime under reverse charge that applies to your services. For this to EVA that pertains to Article 2, this occurs when particular reverse charge is related to the location of the trades. It applies when the buyer is a taxable person for VAT in Portugal and carries out transactions that involve the provision of the right to deduct the tax. What it means: the invoice issued by the provider of the services or goods must contain the words VAT reverse charge. The individual who transfers the services or products does not pay VAT, and it is up to the person who receives the services or products to reverse charge the tax. This option applies in specific cases, such as construction services, and has to do more on domestic reverse charge. The choice between these options depends on the type of service you're providing. If you are involved in construction-related activities or domestic reverse charge, then the second option may be more suitable. Otherwise, the first option usually applies, which is the reverse charge General Rule Article 6. Some self-employed also employs the Article 6, regras de localização. Article 6. This is specifically pertained to location of operations on their VAT regime instead of reverse charge, General Rule Article 6, when dealing with clients outside Portugal. It's a bit confusing when dealing with location tax law. If you incurred some charges on payment from commission or there's a deduction made by your client, then the EVA, reverse charge, General Rule Article 6, apply for you since you need to reverse that deduction from your payment, since you don't want to be charged again. Let's say you earn 300 euros from your client, but you only receive 250. The base value you should put on your Recibo verde is the full amount, the 300 euros. An amount deducted to you which 50 euros should be reverse charge so that the Portuguese finance will not charge you again. You don't want to put 250 in base value and be charged again for VAT, and what left to you earning will get smaller. Very important also when applying EVA liquidas or the reverse charge, you also need to fill in the forms for the reverse charge, like the Modelo 30 and RFI. You'll need your client information like the tax number. If there's no deduction incurred in your payment and no need for the reverse charge exemption, then it's best to choose the Article 6, regras de localização, which relate to the location to your client. Also, from what I know, the Article 6, location doesn't include reverse charge. So pay attention when you're doing your Recibo verdes. If you need to apply a reverse charge, you use the liquidas. So remember, you must indicate on the receipt the location of the transaction in accordance with the specific location rules set out in Article 6 of the VAT Code. If you make a sale within the European Union (EU), that transaction is not subject to VAT collection by the person providing the service. Unlike domestic customers, there is no VAT charged on intra-community transactions. In addition to the sale of products, there is also no VAT charged by the supplier in the supply of intra-community services. only taxation in the country of destination. Therefore, when filling in the receipt, you must indicate the reason for not having to pay the tax. Choose the option VAT, reverse charge, General Rule Article 6, Number 6. This applies whether the company is from an EU country or not. Precautions to be taken in the activity when issuing green receipt for foreign companies, specifically to intra-community transactions and intra-community services, as I mentioned a while ago. Make sure which one you're doing belong to, and make sure in your open activity statement it's marked SIM. So when filling out the declaration of commencement of activity, you must also choose the option Provision or Acquisition of Intra-Community Services, VAT. That because if you already have an open activity and you have foreign customers and you need to issue receipts, and on your opening statement of activity and finances, the provision or acquisition of intra-community services is marked SIN, which means yes. Here a sample on how it looks. If it marked now or no, then you must make a change to your activity. To do this, you just need to fill in that field in your activity data on the finance portal. To do this, you must follow the following path. Click on Personal Data, then on Activity Data, and only then log in with your credentials and add the option Provision or Acquisition of Intra-Community Services. Or you need to declare or inform the Finances Office in person that you are doing services for foreign countries so that your NIF shows up on VIES website as a valid number for international companies. Here's a sample how it look. As you can see, if I input my NIF number or VAT number on the VIES website, it will appear and validate on the VIES database. Also, very important for companies domiciled in the EU, the taxable person number of the company has to be confirmed on the VIES platform. If it is not possible to make this confirmation, you must charge VAT at the rate in force in the customer's country. Every time you issue an invoice, Recibo Verde, for a European customer that is exempt of VAT, you need to check VIES database for your customer tax ID and keep that as a proof, or you will have to charge IVA. Although you don't charge VAT in your first year, but if you're obliged to, you charge VAT to clients inside Portugal. Remember, even you're freelancing outside EU under the simplified regime and earning over 12,500 euros, you do not have to pay VAT if you are working with a foreign client. And you just have to follow the reverse charge rule. It applies to you according to Article 194 when invoicing for IVA in Portugal. Ensure that your client meets the criteria mentioned above and keep track of any changes in regulations. I hope I'm able to help on explaining the VAT regime options. Now, let's move on to base de incidência im IRS, or IRS calculation basis. If your annual total income does not reach 10,000 cumulatively, you are exempt from taxation. Dispensa de retenção, Article 101 of the CIRS. Article 101B of the CIRS is the section that governs this waiver of detention. Prior to January 2016's modifications to the green receipts, it was possible to select without retention, Article 9, Number 1. You must select the base at 100% in other circumstances. There are few exceptions, such as the various categories, whose base is 50%, and the impaired disability of more than 60%, whose base is 25%. If you are not exempt, there is IRS retention whenever the entity to which you issue the bill makes its accounts, declares its expenses to finances. You must select the retention rate. Generally, the amount to be withheld is 25% for the IRS Class B taxpayer in the simplified plan. Article 101 of the Personal Income Tax Code, CIRS, addresses issues related to withholding tax on income. Let's explore the differences between non-resident without establishment and no withholding. Article 101, Number 1 of the CIRS, for non-resident without establishment. First, it refers to individuals or entities that do not have permanent residence in Portuguese territory. Second, these non-residents may earn income in Portugal, but they do not have a fixed establishment in the country. Third, tax withholding tax is applied to such income, according to the rates defined in Article 101. Fourth, the withholding rate varies depending on the category of income, example, property income, services rendered, etc. For no retention, Article 101 of the CIRS. First, this term refers to a specific situation where withholding taxes are not applied. Second, according to Article 101 of the CIRS, entities that have organized accounting are required to withhold tax in certain situations. Third, Retention rates vary depending on the type of income. 11.5% for services rendered, if the paying entity has organized accounting. 16.5% for Category B income. 20% for Category B income of value added of a scientific, artistic, or technical nature, obtained by non-habitual residents in Portuguese territory. 25% for Category F income, property income, and for specific activities listed in Article 151 of the Personal Income Tax Code, such as architects, engineers, artists, etc. Fourth, self-employed workers whose income does not exceed 10,000 euros per year are exempt from withholding tax, according to Article 9 of Decree Law No. 42-91. In summary, while non-resident without establishment refers to the condition of non-residents who obtain income in Portugal, while no withholding Article 101, number 1 of the CIRS, specifies the withholding rates applicable to different categories of income. Attention that there is only retention when your client has organized accounting. If the customer does not have an establishment in Portugal and is not a resident, you must apply the option No Withholding, non-resident without establishment when issuing a green receipt. This option is suitable for transactions with non-Portuguese entities. On the other hand, if the client is a Portuguese entity and you are under the regime of Article 53, you will also be exempt from IRS withholding. In this case, choose the option No Retention Article 101, number 1 of the CIRS. Remember to fill in all the required data, such as the service provision date and the type of document you are issuing, invoice, invoice receipt, or receipt. If the client does not have an establishment in Portugal, the option No Withholding Non-Resident Without Establishment is appropriate to ensure that the IRS withholding is not applied. According to Article 101 of 1 of the Personal Income Tax Code, CIRS, the tax non-withholding regime works through the exemption from withholding taxes on income obtained by taxpayers who are not resident in Portuguese territory. This exemption applies only in situations where there is a double taxation agreement between Portugal and the taxpayer's country of residence, thus ensuring greater facilitation of international trade and promotion of economic activity. Most self-employed workers are subject to IRS withholding tax at the rate of 25%. But if your turnover is less than 12,500 euros per year, you are exempt from withholding tax. Article 101b1, A of the CIRS. So choose the exempt form withholding here. For my part, it's non-resident without establishment since my client is outside Europe. So there's a lot to consider and can be very tricky and confusing whether you're eligible for exemption or retention or not. Remember, I am neither a professional nor expert in this field. If you have concerns on your tax situation, it's best to consult the official guidelines and seek professional advice to ensure compliance with Portuguese VAT regulations. Seeing everything looks okay, and finally click Issue. And then this box appears for you to confirm the issuance of receipt with your detail and your transaction. So better check if everything is in order and click Issue again. And now you've got your proof of green receipt. You can save in your computer and print and send to your client. Let me show you it to you here. This is what green receipt looks like. You can see the first part is the original and the second part is the duplicate. So there you go. I would say that working with green receipt has its advantage, which is being able to work from anywhere. You can and provide different services and have many different clients, have holidays anytime. Finally, you will be your own boss, and if you're thinking about working with green receipt in Portugal, you know that you can apply for a resident permit to carry out independent professional activity. So that it's for now, and I hope this information is helpful to you when you issue your Recibo verdes as first-timers, and hope to see you next on my video. Don't forget to subscribe and like if you don't want to miss anything and if want to hear more with this kind of video. Bye.